The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never known fear. They had never faced an enemy they could not crush. They had never doubted their place at the top of creation. High Commander Zorath stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Citadel, his copper-colored scales gleaming under the light of 3 suns. He watched the endless stream of ships moving through the space lanes, each one a reminder of the power his people commanded. 900 star systems answered to the Empire, and every species within those systems knew their place beneath the Valorians. A junior officer approached with news that would set events in motion that no one could have predicted. The archaeologists on the frozen moon of Keth 7 had found something. Something old. Something that predated even the earliest Valorian records. Zorath turned slowly, his yellow eyes narrowing as he listened to the report. A device had been discovered buried deep beneath the ice, and it was covered in symbols that no scholar could read. The energy readings were unlike anything in their databases. He ordered the artifact brought to the Science Citadel immediately. Such discoveries were rare, and they often held secrets that could strengthen the Empire even further. Zorath had no reason to believe this one would be any different. The artifact arrived 3 days later, carried by a specialized transport ship with the best security the Empire could provide. Scientists gathered around it with eager expressions, their instruments already scanning every surface. The device was roughly the size of a small vehicle, its exterior smooth and dark, with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Chief Scientist Varan was the first to attempt activation. She touched the surface with her scaled hand and felt nothing. She applied energy from various sources and still nothing happened. She spent weeks trying every method known to Valorian science, and the artifact remained dormant. Months turned into years, and years turned into decades. The Empire's greatest minds came and went, each one failing to unlock the device's secrets. Some began to whisper that it was broken, a relic from a dead civilization with no power left to give. Others believed it was simply beyond their understanding, a reminder that even the mighty Valorians had limits. Zorath grew impatient as reports continued to show no progress. He had other concerns, other threats to manage, other worlds to bring under Imperial control. The artifact became a symbol of frustration, a puzzle that wounded Valorian pride. During this time, on the other side of the galaxy, a small blue planet orbited an unremarkable yellow star. The inhabitants called their world Earth, and they were just beginning to reach beyond their own atmosphere. They sent probes to their neighboring planets. They built stations in orbit. They dreamed of touching the stars. Valorian observers had noted the species called humans during a routine survey mission. The report was brief and dismissive. The humans were short-lived creatures with fragile bodies and primitive technology. They fought among themselves constantly. They had barely mastered space travel within their own system. The observer recommended no further attention be given to them. The report was filed and forgotten. Humans were insignificant, a species that would likely destroy itself before ever becoming relevant to galactic affairs. This assessment seemed reasonable at the time. Every piece of evidence supported it. But the Valorians did not understand something fundamental about humanity. They did not grasp that the very traits they dismissed as weaknesses were actually strengths in disguise. Human lives were short, yes, but that made them urgent, driven to accomplish great things before their time ran out. Human bodies were fragile, yes, but that made them clever, always building tools and machines to overcome their limitations. Humans fought among themselves, yes, but they also united when faced with outside threats, setting aside their differences to stand together. Commander Nathan Cole knew nothing about ancient artifacts or galactic empires. He was a simple man from a small town in Nebraska who had joined the Space Exploration Course because he wanted to see what lay beyond the stars. He had worked his way up through the ranks by being reliable, by making good decisions under pressure, by earning the trust of everyone who served with him. He was 43 years old when he took command of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge. It was not the newest ship in the fleet, and it was not the most advanced, but Nathan loved it anyway. The crew of 47 had become like family to him over the years they had spent together. Dara Lisa Brennan served as the ship's chief scientist. She was brilliant and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. She had red hair that she kept tied back and green eyes that seemed to see possibilities where others saw only problems. Nathan trusted her judgment more than almost anyone else he knew. Their mission was simple: survey unexplored regions of space and report anything interesting. It was routine work, the kind of assignment that rarely produced exciting results. They had been at it for 6 months without finding anything worth mentioning. Then the sensors detected an energy signature that made Lisa sit up straight in her chair. She called Nathan to the science station, her voice carrying an edge of excitement that he had not heard in a long time. The readings were strange, she told him, unlike anything in their databases. The energy was coming from a region of space that should have been empty. Something was out there, something that defied everything they knew about physics. Nathan studied the data for a long moment before making his decision. They would investigate. That was what explorers did. They followed the unknown and discovered what secrets it held. Lisa warned him that the readings could indicate danger. The energy levels were extremely high, and they had no way of knowing what they would find. She wanted him to understand the risks before they committed. Nathan listened carefully to her concerns, then gave the order to proceed. Curiosity had always driven humanity forward, he told her. It had taken them from caves to cities, from cities to the stars. He was not about to start ignoring it now. The Horizon's Edge changed course and began moving toward the mysterious signal. None of them knew that they were heading toward a discovery that would change everything. None of them suspected that the fate of their entire species was about to shift in ways they could not imagine. Somewhere across the galaxy, in the science citadel of the Valorian Empire, the dormant artifact suddenly flickered. A single pulse of light traveled across its surface and then faded. The monitoring equipment recorded the event, but no one noticed it among the endless stream of data. The artifact was waiting. It had been waiting for thousands of years. And now, finally, the ones it had been waiting for were coming. The Horizon's Edge emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of a debris field. Broken metal and shattered hull plating drifted through the darkness like the bones of some great beast. Nathan stood at the command console and felt a chill run down his spine as he surveyed the destruction. Lisa worked frantically at her station, trying to identify what they were seeing. The wreckage was not human. The alloys were different, the design unfamiliar. This was alien technology, and it had been destroyed by something violent. Pilot Danny Webb maneuvered the ship carefully through the floating debris. He was young, only 26, but his hands were steady on the controls. He had grown up flying crop dusters in Kansas before joining the Corps, and his natural skill had made him one of the best pilots in the fleet. Communications Officer Maria Santos picked up a faint signal coming from deeper within the debris field. It was automated, probably a distress beacon that had been running for years. She triangulated the source and sent the coordinates to Danny. They found the station at the center of the wreckage. It was massive, at least 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built in space. The hull was breached in several places, and there were no life signs. Whatever had happened here, it had happened a long time ago. Nathan asked Lisa what she thought. She studied the readings for a moment before responding. The station matched no known human design, and the technology was clearly more advanced than anything Earth possessed. This was first contact, she said, even if the beings they were meeting were long dead. The decision to board the station was not made lightly. Nathan gathered his senior officers and laid out the risks. They had no idea what had killed the original crew. They had no idea if the atmosphere inside was breathable. They had no idea what they might find. But they also had no choice. This was why they were out here. This was what exploration meant. You face the unknown and you learn from it. Lisa led the boarding party with Nathan at her side. They wore environmental suits as a precaution, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness of the dead station. The corridors were wide, built for beings larger than humans, and the walls were covered in the same strange symbols they had seen on the external hull. Security Officer Frank Patterson kept his weapon ready as they moved deeper into the structure. He was a veteran of 3 combat deployments on Earth before joining the exploration program, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The station was too quiet, too still. They found the first body in what appeared to be a control room. The creature was tall and covered in scales, its features frozen in an expression of terror. Whatever had killed it had done so quickly. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of a fight. Lisa scanned the body with her portable equipment and reported that the cause of death was rapid decompression. The hull breach had happened suddenly, and the crew had not had time to reach safety. It was a tragic accident, nothing more. Nathan felt a small measure of relief at that news. Accidents were something he could understand. Accidents did not hunt you through dark corridors. They continued their exploration and eventually found what the energy signature had been leading them toward. In the very heart of the station, protected by multiple sealed doors, sat a device unlike anything else on the station. It was smooth and dark, covered in shifting symbols, and it hummed with a power that made the air feel thick. Lisa approached it slowly, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her caution. The device seemed to call to her, seemed to want her to come closer. She could not explain the feeling, but she knew it was real. Nathan told her to be careful. They had no idea what this thing was or what it could do. Touching unknown alien technology seemed like a very bad idea. Lisa heard his warning, but something deeper was guiding her now. She reached out her hand and pressed her palm against the smooth surface of the device. Light exploded from the artifact, filling the entire chamber with brilliance. The symbols on its surface began to move faster and faster, spiraling in patterns that seemed to have meaning. Lisa felt something pour into her mind, a flood of information so vast that she thought her skull might split open. Nathan rushed to her side, calling her name, trying to pull her away. But the light held her in place, and no amount of force could break the connection. He could only watch as his friend was transformed by something beyond his understanding. The knowledge came in waves. First there were languages, hundreds of them, including the one used by the beings who had built this station. Then there were sciences, physics and chemistry and biology that made human understanding look like the scribblings of children. Then there were histories, the rise and fall of civilizations spanning millions of years. Lisa saw the architects in her mind, the ancient race that had seeded the galaxy with life. She understood their purpose, their hope that one day a species would arise capable of uniting what they had created. She saw the primers, devices left behind and elevate the worthy. The light faded as suddenly as it had appeared. Lisa collapsed into Nathan's arms, her body trembling. For a long moment, she could not speak, could not even think clearly. The sheer volume of what she now carried was overwhelming. Nathan helped her sit up and asked if she was all right. Lisa looked at him with eyes that seemed different now, deeper somehow, as if they held secrets that went beyond anything human. She told him that she was more than all right. She told him that everything had changed. She explained what she had learned as they made their way back to the horizon's edge. The device was a primer, created by the architects before they vanished from the galaxy. It was designed to choose a species and give them the knowledge to lead others. and for reasons she did not fully understand, it had chosen humanity. Nathan struggled to process what she was saying. They were explorers, scientists, ordinary people. They were not ready to lead anyone, anywhere. Lisa smiled at his concern and told him that readiness had never been a requirement. The architects had understood something important about life. Progress did not wait for permission. It happened when ordinary beings were forced to become extraordinary. Back on the horizon's edge, Lisa touched Maria's hand and transferred a fraction of what she carried. The communications officer gasped as new understanding flooded her mind. Suddenly, she could read the alien symbols, could understand the transmissions coming from distant stars. The process was repeated with others. Danny gained knowledge of propulsion systems that could fold space itself. Frank learned defensive technologies that made human weapons look like toys. Engineer after engineer, scientist after scientist, each received a gift that elevated them beyond what they had been. Nathan watched it all with a mixture of wonder and fear. He trusted Lisa, but he also understood that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Humanity was changing, and there was no way to know where that change would lead. Lisa seemed to sense his concern. She placed her hand on his shoulder and told him that fear was natural. The architects had felt it too when they first began their work. But they had moved forward anyway, and so would humanity. What none of them knew, what none of them could have predicted, was that their activation of the primer had sent a signal across the galaxy. Sensors in the Valorian Science Citadel had detected the event. And High Commander Zorath was already receiving reports that filled him with a dread he had never experienced before. The humans had awakened something that was never meant for them, and the Empire would not allow them to keep it. High Commander Zorath stood before the assembled War Council with fury burning in his yellow eyes. The reports from the border systems had confirmed his worst fears. The artifact had activated, and it had bonded with the humans. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the gathered admirals and generals. For decades, they had watched the primer sit dormant in their laboratories, resisting every attempt to unlock its power. And now, some primitive species on the far side of the galaxy had succeeded where the mighty Valorians had failed. Admiral Kath rose from his seat to address the council. He was the oldest among them, a veteran of countless campaigns, and his voice carried the weight of experience. The legends of the architects were known to every Valorian child, he reminded them. The primers were said to choose a species worthy of leading the galaxy. If those legends were true, then the Empire faced an existential threat. Zorath slammed his fist against the table. He refused to accept that these humans, these weak and short-lived creatures, could pose any danger to an empire that had stood for 12,000 years. They were nothing. He insisted. They had achieved nothing. They had conquered nothing. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his heart. The primer had rejected Valorian touch for 3 decades. It had waited dormant and patient until the humans arrived. There had to be a reason for that. Even if Zorath could not bring himself to admit it. General Thrax, commander of the ground forces, suggested a simple solution. Destroy the humans before they could learn to use what they had been given. It would be easy, he argued. Humanity had barely spread beyond their home system. A single fleet could wipe them out in a matter of days. The council debated the proposal with voices growing louder and more heated. Some argued for caution, pointing out that they did not fully understand what the primer could do. Others demanded immediate action, insisting that every moment of delay gave humanity more time to grow stronger. Zorath listened to the arguments and felt the weight of his position pressing down on him. He was the High Commander, the leader of the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. The decision was his to make. He thought about the reports from the human sector. They spoke of a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times. They spoke of wars and conflicts, of pollution and poverty. Surely such a species could not be the chosen ones that the architects had been waiting for. But then he remembered another detail from those reports. Humans had survived every catastrophe they faced. They had adapted and rebuilt. They had turned their weaknesses into strengths through sheer determination. Perhaps that was exactly what the architects had been looking for. The thought terrified him more than any enemy fleet ever could. He made his decision and announced it to the council. The Grand Fleet would be assembled. All 7,000 warships. They would travel to human space and eliminate the threat before it could grow. There would be no negotiation, no diplomacy, no mercy. This was about survival. Admiral Keth accepted the order with a grin nod. He understood what was at stake. If the humans were allowed to fully access the Primer's knowledge, they could become unstoppable. The window for action was closing rapidly. Across the galaxy, the horizon's edge was racing toward Earth at speeds that should have been impossible. Lisa had shared enough knowledge with Danny that he could modify the ship's engines. What once would have taken months now took only days. Nathan spent the journey trying to understand what was happening to his crew. They were changing in ways he could see and ways he could not. Their movements were more confident. Their conversations were filled with concepts he could not follow. They were becoming something more than human. Lisa found him on the observation deck, staring at the stars streaking past. She asked him what he was thinking, and he told her the truth. He was afraid. Not of the aliens who had built the station, not of the empire he had heard about in Lisa's visions. He was afraid of losing himself, of losing the humanity that defined him. Lisa sat beside him and spoke gently. The knowledge did not replace who they were, she explained. It added to them. Nathan Cole from Nebraska was still there, with all his kindness and courage and stubborn practicality. He was simply more now, capable of things he never dreamed possible. Nathan asked her what would happen when they reached Earth. Lisa grew serious as she considered the question. The knowledge she carried included warnings about the Valorian Empire. They were conquerors who tolerated no rivals. When they learned what had happened, they would come with everything they had. How long did they have? Nathan wanted to know. Lisa calculated quickly using abilities she had not possessed a week ago. 3 weeks, maybe 4. The Valorians were far away, but their ships were fast. Humanity needed to prepare. The horizon's edge entered Earth orbit and immediately transmitted an emergency signal to every government on the planet. Lisa's message was simple and direct. Humanity faced extinction at the hands of an alien empire. They had 3 weeks to get ready. She could help them survive. But only if they listened. The response was chaos. Some leaders demanded proof. Others accused them of hoaxing the greatest prank in history. Military commanders wanted to know how to fight, and scientists wanted to know everything about the alien technology. Nathan took charge of the military briefings while Lisa worked with the scientists. They divided the work based on their strengths, just as they had always done. The partnership that had served them well in deep space now served them in saving their world. Lisa touched the hands of engineers and physicists, sharing fragments of the architect's knowledge. Within hours, blueprints were being drafted for weapons and shields that humanity had never imagined. Within days, factories around the world were retooling to produce components for technologies that defied everything they knew. The knowledge spread like wildfire through the population. Teachers shared it with students. Workers shared it with colleagues. Parents shared it with children. Humanity was transforming at a rate that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. Nathan watched the progress with growing hope. Humans were adapting, just as they always had. They were taking the impossible and making it possible. They were facing extinction and choosing to fight. Meanwhile, the Valorian Grand Fleet was assembling at the edge of human space. 7,000 warships gathered in formation, their weapons charged and their crews ready. High Commander Zorath stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed his armada with satisfaction. In 3 days, they would reach Earth. In 3 days, they would end the human threat forever. The Valorians had never lost a war, and Zorath was certain they would not lose this one. He did not know that humanity was already building things his sensors could not detect. He did not know that the very fabric of space around Earth was being woven into something new. He did not know that the species he had dismissed as primitive was about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The countdown to the battle for Earth had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Earth had become a world transformed in just 18 days. Factories that once produced cars now built starship components. Universities that once taught basic physics now shared knowledge of dimensional mechanics. Ordinary people who once worried about bills and jobs now prepared to defend their entire species. Nathan stood in the command center that had been constructed beneath the Rocky Mountains. Screens covered every wall, showing the progress of humanity's desperate preparations. 200 ships had been built from scratch using architect knowledge, each one capable of things no human vessel had ever achieved. Lisa was everywhere at once, or so it seemed. She coordinated the science teams, resolved technical problems, and continued sharing knowledge with anyone who needed it. Her body showed signs of exhaustion, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had seen what humanity could become, and she would not rest until they got there. Danny Webb had been promoted to fleet commander, his natural piloting skills enhanced by understanding that came from ancient minds. He ran simulations constantly, testing tactics against enemies that moved and fought like the Valorians. Most of the simulations ended in human defeat, but each failure taught them something new. Frank Patterson had built a security force unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Soldiers trained with weapons that could punch through starship armor. Defensive systems protected key installations with shields that bent light itself. If the Valorians made it to the ground, they would find humans ready to fight them. Maria Santos maintained communications with outposts throughout the solar system. Humanity had spread quickly in the past 2 weeks, establishing listening posts on every planet and moon. They would know the moment the enemy arrived. In a hospital in Chicago, Dr. Carol Adams was using her newly acquired medical knowledge to heal patients who had been told they were beyond help. Cancer vanished under treatments that worked at the cellular level. Damaged organs regenerated in hours instead of months. She saved more lives in 2 weeks than she had in her entire previous career. In a classroom in Tokyo, teacher Kenji Yamamoto shared mathematical concepts with his students that allowed them to calculate trajectories through folded space. Children who had struggled with basic algebra were now solving equations that would have baffled the greatest minds of the previous generation. In a factory in Germany, engineer Hans Müller supervised the construction of the first reality anchor. It was a massive device designed to stabilize space-time across the entire solar system. Once activated, it would prevent the Valorians from using certain types of weapons that could destroy planets from a distance. Lisa had warned them about those weapons. The Valorians had ended civilizations before by collapsing stars or triggering supernovas. They would not hesitate to do the same to Earth if given the chance. The reality anchor was humanity's insurance policy against extinction. Nathan received reports from around the world as preparations continued. The pace was incredible, but so were the stakes. Every person on Earth understood that failure meant death for themselves and everyone they loved. That understanding drove them forward when exhaustion told them to stop. He thought about his family back in Nebraska. His parents still lived on the farm where he had grown up. His sister had 2 children, who called him Uncle Nate. They were counting on him, just as billions of others were counting on everyone involved in the defense. Lisa found him during a rare, quiet moment. She could see the weight he carried, and she wanted to help. She told him that the burden of leadership was not meant to be carried alone. The architects had learned that lesson over millions of years. Their greatest achievements came through cooperation, not individual effort. Nathan asked her about the architects. Who were they, really? What had happened to them? Why did they leave these primers behind, instead of staying to guide the galaxy themselves? Lisa shared what she had learned. The architects were the first intelligent species to arise in the galaxy, billions of years ago. They had explored every corner of the cosmos. They had built wonders that still existed on worlds throughout the stars. And then, when their time was ending, they had made a choice. They could have clung to power, she explained. They could have tried to preserve their civilization forever. But they understood that life needed to grow, to change, to make its own mistakes and discoveries. So they seeded the galaxy with the potential for intelligence and left behind the primers to help the worthy species find their way. Nathan found the story both beautiful and sad. An entire civilization had chosen to step aside so that others could rise. He wondered if humanity would ever have the wisdom to make such a choice. Lisa smiled and told him that was exactly why the primer had chosen them. Humans understood sacrifice. They understood that sometimes the greatest victories came through giving instead of taking. It was woven into their nature, even when they forgot it themselves. The alarm sounded before Nathan could respond. Maria's voice came over the intercom with news that made his blood run cold. The Valorian Grand Fleet had been detected at the edge of the solar system. They had arrived 3 days early. Danny rushed to the command center with tactical data streaming across his screens. 7,000 warships were arranging themselves in an attack formation. The energy readings from their weapons were off the charts. This was not a fleet that had come to negotiate. Nathan ordered all defensive systems to full readiness. The reality anchor was activated, its protective field spreading across the solar system like an invisible shield. Humanity's 200 ships launched from their hidden bases and took up positions between Earth and the approaching enemy. High Commander Zorath's face appeared on the main view screen, transmitted on all frequencies. His message was brief and without mercy. Humanity had stolen power that did not belong to them. They would now face the consequences. Surrender was not an option. Survival was not an option. Only extinction awaited. Nathan responded with words that would be remembered for generations. He told Zorath that humans had not stolen anything. The primer had chosen them freely. And while humanity did not seek war, they would not accept destruction. If the Valorians wanted a fight, they would get one. Lisa stood beside him as the transmission ended. She could feel the fear in the room, the knowledge that they were facing an enemy with thousands of years of military experience and ships that vastly outnumbered their own. But she could also feel something else, something uniquely human. It was hope. It was defiance. It was the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when the odds seemed impossible. Humans had faced extinction before, from ice ages and plagues and their own foolishness. They had survived every time. They would survive this too. Danny's voice cut through the tension with the words everyone was waiting to hear. The fleet was ready. The defenses were active. Humanity was as prepared as it would ever be. Nathan gave the order that launched humanity into its greatest battle. All ships were to engage the enemy. All defenses were to hold the line. Every single person was to fight with everything they had. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as two civilizations rushed toward each other across the darkness of space. High Commander Zorath watched his sensors with growing confusion as the human fleet approached. There were only 200 ships facing his 7,000. It should have been laughable. It should have been pathetic. But something about the way those ships moved made his scales prickle with unease. The human vessels did not fly through space like any craft he had ever seen. They flickered and shifted, appearing in one location and then another without crossing the distance between. His targeting systems could not lock onto them. His weapons fired into empty space where ships had been moments before. Admiral Keth shouted orders from his position at the tactical station. "Concentrate fire on a single target," he commanded. "Overwhelm their ability to evade. Pour enough energy into one spot that nothing could survive." The Valorian fleet obeyed, thousands of weapons focusing on a single human ship. The barrage was devastating, enough firepower to crack a moon. But when the light faded, the human vessel was simply gone, having moved to a different dimension entirely. Zorath felt something he had never experienced in battle. He felt fear. Nathan watched the engagement from his command chair, data streaming across his displays. Danny's pilots were performing brilliantly, using abilities the Valorians could not understand to dance around the enemy formation. But defense was not enough. They needed to strike back. Lisa had developed the weapons herself, based on knowledge that came from civilizations far older than the Valorians. They did not destroy in the conventional sense. They erased, removing matter from existence at the molecular level. They were precise and devastating and utterly terrifying. Danny gave the order to begin the counterattack. Human ships materialized inside the Valorian formation, their weapons finding targets with perfect accuracy. The Valorian warships went dark as their power cores simply ceased to exist. Hull sections vanished, leaving crews exposed to the vacuum. But life support continued and escape pods launched. The humans were not killing when they did not have to. Zorath watched in horror as ship after ship fell silent around him. His grand fleet, the pride of the Valorian Empire, was being dismantled by a species he had dismissed as irrelevant. He screamed orders that made no difference. He demanded tactics that achieved nothing. The battle was slipping away from him. Admiral Keth approached with a grim expression. They needed to retreat, he urged. They needed to regroup and develop new strategies. Continuing this fight was suicide. Zorath struck his advisor across the face with a force that sent the old admiral sprawling. Retreat was unthinkable. The Valorian Empire did not retreat. They had never retreated in 12,000 years. But as he spoke those words, another 300 ships went dark. His fleet was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, cheers erupted as the humans realized they were winning. Impossible odds had been faced. An impossible victory was emerging. Danny's pilots continued their devastating dance through the enemy formation. Nathan did not celebrate. He watched the casualty reports from the Valorian fleet and felt a weight settle on his shoulders. Thousands of enemy crew members were dying, not because they were evil, but because their leaders had made terrible choices. War was always like this, victory and tragedy woven together. Lisa sensed his mood and moved to stand beside him. She understood what he was feeling. The architects had felt it too, the sorrow that came from possessing power great enough to end lives. It was the burden of the strong to be merciful, even when others would not be. Nathan made a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. He ordered Danny to focus on disabling ships rather than destroying them. Preserve enemy lives wherever possible. Show the Valorians that humans were not the monsters they expected. Danny relayed the orders to his fleet. Weapons were adjusted to target engines and power systems. Escape pods were left untouched. Medical ships were spared entirely. The humans fought to win, but they fought with honor. The battle lasted less than 1 hour. When it ended, the Valorian Grand Fleet was reduced to drifting hulks. 7,000 warships had been rendered helpless, but most of their crews had survived. Rescue operations were already beginning as human ships moved through the debris. Zorath stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship, surrounded by the smell of smoke and the sounds of damage alarms. His empire had just suffered the worst defeat in its history. Everything he believed about Valorian superiority had been proven wrong. Nathan's face appeared on the view screen, calm and serious. He told Zorath that the fighting was over. Humanity had no desire for revenge or conquest. They wanted peace, cooperation, a chance to build something better. The choice of what happened next belonged to the Valorians. Zorath stared at the human commander for a long moment. He expected gloating, mockery, demands for submission. Instead, he saw only sincerity. This strange species had defeated his entire fleet and then offered friendship. It was beyond anything he could comprehend. But he was not a fool. He could see that his options had narrowed to almost nothing. Fighting would only bring more destruction. Defiance would only bring more death. Perhaps it was time for the Valorian Empire to learn a new way. He signaled his acceptance of Nathan's terms. The war was over before it truly began. In the months that followed, the galaxy was transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity did not hoard the architect's knowledge. They shared it freely with any species willing to receive it. Old enemies became new partners. Ancient feuds were set aside in favor of cooperation. Lisa traveled to dozens of worlds, touching the minds of beings who looked nothing like humans but dreamed the same dreams. Each species brought something unique to the growing community. The Valorians contributed their organizational skills and military discipline. The Kethrani offered artistic traditions spanning millions of years. The Soliver shared medical knowledge that extended lifespans dramatically. Nathan became an ambassador, representing humanity in councils that debated the future of entire star systems. He brought the same practical wisdom that had served him in deep space. He listened more than he spoke. He sought common ground instead of demanding victory. He earned respect through his actions rather than his words. Danny trained pilots from 100 different species, sharing techniques that combined human intuition with architect knowledge. His students spread throughout the galaxy, protecting the trade routes and exploration paths that connected the growing alliance. Frank established a peacekeeping force that resolved conflicts before they could become wars. His officers were chosen for their wisdom as much as their strength. They intervened only when necessary, and always with the goal of preserving life. Maria built a communications network that allowed instant contact between any 2 points in the galaxy. Information flowed freely for the first time in history. Lies and propaganda became harder to sustain when truth could travel at the speed of thought. 1 year after the battle, Lisa stood on the observation deck of humanity's first orbital city. Ships from dozens of worlds passed peacefully through the solar system. The stars that had once seemed so distant now felt like neighbors. Nathan joined her there, as he often did. Their friendship had deepened through everything they had experienced. They were partners in the truest sense, building something neither could have created alone. Lisa told him about her conversations with the architect's knowledge. They had hoped for exactly this, she explained. They had seeded the galaxy with potential and trusted that one day a species would arise capable of bringing it together. Humanity's short lives made them urgent. Their fragility made them clever. Their history of conflict had taught them the value of peace. Nathan asked if they were ready for the responsibility they had been given. It was such a heavy burden to carry. Lisa smiled and reminded him of something he already knew. Humans had never waited until they were ready. They had faced challenge after challenge throughout their history, learning and growing with each one. They made mistakes, yes, but they also learned from them. That willingness to try, to fail, to get back up and try again, was their greatest strength. Nathan looked out at the stars and felt a sense of peace settle over him. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders he had never imagined. His species had been given an incredible gift, and they had used it to lift others up rather than push them down. That was something to be proud of. Lisa placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke words that seemed to carry the weight of ages. The architects had believed in the power of cooperation over domination, of wisdom over force, of hope over fear. They had passed that belief to humanity through the primer. And now humanity was passing it to the galaxy. This was their gift, she said. Not the weapons or the technology or the knowledge. Those were just tools. The real gift was showing others what was possible when beings chose to work together instead of against each other. Nathan nodded slowly, understanding at last why the primer had chosen humanity. It was not despite their flaws, but because of them. They knew what it meant to struggle, to fail, to rise again. They had earned the right to guide others through those same challenges. The universe stretched before them, vast and mysterious and full of promise. And humanity,